Okay, we're going to be taking a look at many different level 1 scenarios and answering some basic questions about whether it's better to 5-point or invade and how you should do those things in solo queue. We're going to take a look at examples of collapsing on people level 1 when you get information on where they are, whether it's better to ward or save your ward, whether it's better to ward as a jungler or switch for sweeper nowadays, and whether you should leash, not leash, how good is fake leashing, how good is cheesing, all of these things we're going to be covering it. And we're going to look at some actual in-game examples across many different ranks. I started with some challenger games to get some good examples of maybe what it would look like to kind of properly play level 1. So we'll start there. But what I realized is that a lot of these challenger games are consistently not what you would normally see at average ranks in solo queue. And so what I was seeing in my games or seeing in these challenger games is not really standard for what you would see in solo queue, but it is standard for maybe what's more correct. So we'll take a look at examples across different elos so that we get a variety of situations occurring and talk about, the decisions that people are making in them. And hopefully you'll have a much better understanding of level 1 by the time you're done with this video. So in this first one here, we have a challenger game in NA. Kind of top of the ladder, we're specifically looking at this jungler here who's currently rank 3. Fortunately, rank 1 and rank 2 haven't played any games on this patch. So we're, taking a look at this guy's games, but we're taking a look at what everyone's doing. And this video is for all roles, and we'll be learning a lot from it. So this game, we see really the closest thing to a 5-point, as you can get. But we're going to be talking about, again, going through some different examples. I want to talk about really what I think first before we get into the examples. In my opinion, invading can obviously be better with certain champions. For example, I main Braum, and as a Braum player, you may think that I want to invade every game. And I don't know, maybe I should. But in my personal opinion, I found that invading in solo queue is really, really coin flippy because it relies on your... there's just such a lack of information level 1 that if you think that you can win your lane consistently, it seems like it would be better to try to win your lane and have nothing terrible happen level 1 than it would be for you to flip the entire game on winning level 1. So because of that, for me, I've always thought that I can get more advantage out of playing for my lane, both in the very early seconds of the game, but just in general, rather than coin flipping level 1. Because even when you go for an invade, and we'll look at this, as you probably know, there are times when you'll have an invade with a strong level 1 team comp, and just the way that people end up positioning themselves and running into each other, things go bad and you end up dying. The other thing is like, the less coordinated you are, especially the lower rank you go, the worse I found invades to go, because not all of your teammates are going to come. Not everybody is usually like off of the gate level 1. We can even see in this game, for example, that the rank 3 jungler we're spectating here is actually kind of AFK level 1 in the fountain, which is really bad. And so the lower rank you go, and keep in mind, this is like a top of the line challenger game here in NA, and we've got someone AFK on the fountain. So there's not really a chance that we're going to invade this game anyways because of that. So when you're thinking about this, you're thinking about what is going to provide the most consistent value for me in solo queue across a bunch of games. And I think that invading is going to do a lot of things to, one, inhibit your practice, because even if you do get ahead, now you have all these really weird situations with items and with coming back into lane at different times. And if you're not, if you're a newer player or a lower ranked player and you're really trying to practice and hone in your laning phase, you're going to mess it up if you're invading all the time. And not only are you going to mess up your practice, but you're also going to be potentially coin flipping the game. Since even a decent invade can go south, or people can walk the wrong way and reveal it and waste your time, as opposed to doing other things. So, this is pretty stock standard, level 1. And one of the things that I found that was really interesting, and we can see it in this example as well, is that the way that people 5-point in Challenger is not exactly the way you would drop a 5-point on paper, and we'll talk about why that is. Essentially, I think that there's a bit of an evolution going on where we have to understand like really what we're looking to hopefully gain out of level 1 and how we can kind of consistently get ahead and take the best invade that we could if we are looking to invade. So really, when we're thinking about what we're working with here, the most important thing to note is that there's 4 entrances to the jungle. You have an entrance here near top side, which is mirrored on the other side of the map. Then you have an entrance on the top side of mid lane, which is mirrored here. And then you have another mirrored entrance, here at the bottom side of mid. And then, of course, there's an entrance into the jungles through bot lane. So one of the main things that you would hope to accomplish through invading is actually to get your jungler into the enemy jungle so that you can start some camps without anyone noticing you. So that's the main benefit that you would have from looking to invade. If you can find a kill off of it, that's great, but you're not necessarily playing for that because there's just a random chance that that's going to happen. And again, things can go really poorly. So most of the time you're invading, when you think about how you want to approach it, you're going to be only attacking and entering at these points. Otherwise, it's not really invading. Otherwise, you're more or less cheesing. So then if we think about, well, if we're the defending team, how do we want to defend against an invade? Where do we want to stand? And the traditional answer that you've probably heard of, which is just your basic 5-point, would be essentially to stick one person in each of these entrances and then to have somebody in mid lane. And why do you have somebody in mid lane as opposed to somewhere else? The reason is because if we look at the turrets are providing really important vision to us level 1. So we're looking at red side's vision right now. And so you can see that obviously with this wall here, top lane, there's just no entrance anywhere other than inside of the lane. There's no entrance into the jungle except, for when we hit our first entrance. I mean, the only other way you could go is you'd have to go through the turret. So obviously there's no entrance there. In mid lane, you can see the vision here. Even if you wrap around this wall on the inside towards their turret, you're going to get spotted by the turret's vision because it's quite large. And so that's really important to note. So basically, there's just no entrance that you could get into. So same thing here with bot lane. Bot lane's got a bit of a different wall than top lane, but same thing as the mid lane situation. If you were to try to enter this jungle entrance through this other side, you'd just be spotted by the turret. So that's really important to note. So what this means is that you can really only enter through these 4 entrances, and that's it. It's the only real way to get into the jungle. I mean, the only other way would be to go over a wall like this, which can be done, but it's a little bit difficult. Actually, I should point it out because some people do it. For example, on Graves or a champion that can dash or take a dash level 1, there is actually an invade where, or not really so much of an invade in terms of trying to find a kill, but usually an invade in terms of trying to take camps, where if your champion can take a dash level 1, there's actually a really sick invade where you can dash over this thin wall here and then either collapse on the person in Tribrush, or you can walk into the enemy jungle without being spotted, even if they have a person here and a person here. Although you'll probably run into, unless their jungler's starting on the other side of the map and some random person like the mid laner's watching here, you'll probably run into somebody. But suffice to say, we basically want to start out by thinking about, why have we changed from the basic 5-point that you've heard of putting one person here, one person here, one person in mid lane, one person here, and one person here? And the first question is, why is somebody in mid lane? The reason why somebody's in mid lane is because if we know that we're going to attack one of these entrances, the most vulnerable entrance and the place where you could have the best invade is going to be through mid. And it's going to be, let's say if you're on blue side this game, it would be through here. And you look at the vision that we have here. So the person standing here is going to have vision, somewhere out in a ring like this. But the problem is that because you're hugging this wall and they can't see over this wall, they don't see you until the very last second when you turn around this corner here. And so the best invades are not invades where you walk straight at somebody, like an invade where you walk at this bush here and you just walk straight through the river at them, or an invade where, you're invading Tribrush bot and you walk through here. The best invades are the invades where you hug a wall and they only see you at the last second when you turn a corner. So if you're invading mid here, you're going to attack it by hugging this wall and then turning the corner so that they only get vision on you at the last second. So one of the problems with sticking somebody really far up here is if you're standing right here, you're going to have a very short reaction time to somebody coming out of this bush and trying to CC you level 1. Really big problem. So what a lot of people would do is we need to think about how to fortify this position to prevent something like that from happening. And one of the things that we can do is we can use our extra person in our mid laner, and they can play like up here in the middle of mid lane. Now they're going to have plenty of warning if someone comes straight at them or someone comes out of this bush or out of this bush, because they're sitting here in the middle. So they have plenty of reaction time, even though they're out in the open, before anyone can get onto them from any angle. And then obviously somebody can't get behind them because they have their turret back there. So your mid laner in a basic 5-point would stand kind of out here in the middle of the mid lane. And then that's going to provide vision that is going to help defend this position and defend this position from these type of invades. But we should think about like, you know, how this is going to play out. So obviously we have the mid laner watching, and so we'll see if somebody enters this bush. But the other thing that we can do is we can tell this person, instead of standing here, maybe you should be standing back here. Because by standing back here, you're still going to see the same thing. If they come through this entrance, you're still going to see it. But you're going to see them when they're here and you're back here, instead of seeing them when you're here and they're here. And so the distance is so big that by standing back here instead, you're going to be able to see the same information, collect the same information, but be able to back off if they send 5 people there much more easily and prevent yourself from dying. So generally speaking, in a 5-point, you're going to have like the top laner here, you're going to have the jungler here, you're going to have your mid laner up mid here, and then you're going to have like, you know, your AD carry and your support in positions like this. But we're going to talk about why challengers never actually stand in those exact positions. And a big part of that, a big reason for that, is because they don't want to get caught by really smart invades like this. If you know where everyone's going to stand level 1, it can be really easy to design invades around it. And so one of the problems is that since you're trying to mitigate dying level 1, if you stand in these basic positions like here, well, they'll just invade you here around this wall. If you stand here, then they'll hug this wall and then turn this corner, place a ward in the bush and hit you with an ability or sweep it or something like that as they come around this corner. And they can kind of do the same thing that we just saw in mid. So you can no longer stand here. So where do you stand? Well, maybe you can stand in the back of the bush to have a little bit extra time to see them as they're coming. Maybe you can stand actually in front of the bush. Is one that I really like, because if you stand here, you can see, yes, there's this pixel bush here, but you can see all around here if you're standing up here. So you'll see if anyone comes and enters the pixel brush, and then you can potentially back off. You know, if it's just their top laner standing there or whatever, you can, you know, sit here and chill, but you can back off if you see multiple people coming. So really you should be standing maybe forward here. You know, is one option. Maybe the back of the bush here, especially if you can maybe dash to cut this wall. You know, here, standing backwards here, standing further back instead of standing right around this wall spot is really good. And then we'll get to mid lane in a second, but you know, here you have a little bit better options, because even if they are coming from this bush here, you're going to be able to see them from pretty decent distance. And same thing, like if you're standing here around the curve of the bush, you're going to be able to see if they're moving upriver this way. And hopefully if you have some support standing over here or something like that, you'll also see if they're moving up the river through here. So you'd have a, you know, support in here. This is a pretty hard bush to invade properly, right? Because at least for red side here, because you can't wrap around here. And I guess the best way would be to hug this wall, because if you stand in here, they're going to see you enter this pixel brush the same way that you would with top lane. So if they're standing here, they're going to see you. And you can't reliably come through here and cut the wall, because there's probably somebody standing here. But not necessarily, right? So if you want to fish for these things, you can fish for them. But I think that they're unlikely to do anything consistently. And you're going to be able to make better use of your time in the lanes and things like that anyway. So we talked basically about how the 5-point, I think, has adapted to these invades that commonly target the spots people would be standing in. And instead of standing in those spots, people have figured out how to adapt and basically play You can even see like Tarzan doing the same thing here. Instead of standing back here, maybe you decide to stand back here. I think maybe here it gives you more flexibility, to move. But obviously people have adapted where they're standing. And I think the thing that really stood out is in all of these challenger games that I reviewed, the level ones, nobody did a standard 5-point, but there was only one invade out of like 8 games that I went over. And it was not an invade with intent to kill. It was an invade to get a Nidalee into Raptors. We'll be going through that example. And I think that they probably would have backed off and not fought level 1 with the enemy team if they met any resistance on their way into the Raptor camp. So I think invading is very, very uncommon the higher up that you go, because it is such a coin flip. And people are confident they're going to be able to consistently perform well in their lane, and they'd rather do that than take some random chance on where people might be level 1. So they play respectful level 1. And then number 2, they've adapted where they're standing. You can see, for example, in this game, well, this guy's not standing here or here. He is, standing up in top lane in a way he can see most people entering the pixel brush. And he's playing even safer, actually, because, well, he's getting less information for his jungler by not really knowing if people are entering here into the pixel brush or if they're going into here through here. He's protecting his own lane by making sure that he's in a really safe spot and that he cannot get killed level 1. Because obviously the other option would be just stand under your turret level 1. You'll never die. But then, your jungler can get invaded. You're not providing any information to your team level 1 because you're overlapping your vision with your turret's vision. So I don't necessarily think that that's good, standing under your turret level 1. Obviously the game starts really even in champion select, but definitely at 0-0 you shouldn't be AFK on the fountain. So obviously those things go without saying, but essentially we've adapted the 5-point. So everyone's standing in off positions. You'll commonly see mid laners actually slip into this bush. One of the problems is, like, take a look at this situation in mid lane or something like that. One of the problems is if both mid laners want to stand right here in the middle of mid lane in order to make sure nobody's entering these bushes, you're going to have some problems with that because, number one, let's say you're a Yasuo. In this case, I think it's versus a Nyla or something. But let's say that you're Yasuo versus Syndra. Obviously, you can't really walk up level 1 as the Yasuo and contest the middle of the lane like that, because the Syndra is going to just poke you for free. And the information that you're providing, well, you're really not even going to be able to provide it. You'll provide it for a few seconds before you're forced off of holding the position. And so it's not really always possible for the mid laner to guard this like this. So then the question would be, well, what does the mid laner do if they can't really guard this? The other thing I'm starting to notice, and we can probably see it here, is that mid lane, these bushes got pushed back, and it's so wide now that, I guess we can see that Nefiri could be a little bit further towards bot. She's obviously leaning towards this top side of the lane, but you're not actually potentially able to see the entire entrance to both bushes level 1 as a mid laner anymore. It's too wide. It's too far apart. So even if she moved down here a little bit, I don't know that she'd be able to see all of this at once. So that basically should tell you then that if you can't see all of this level 1, if you can't reveal all of that, what a lot of mid laners do is they slip into one of these two bushes level 1. So let's say I was Yasuo. I would probably want to slip into the bush towards Diana, because if something happens, I have a teammate I can run to. I'm helping to defend my jungler, since my jungler is showing intent to potentially start this side of the map. So I would slip into this bush if I was Yasuo level 1 and felt comfortable doing that, because then it's the same thing where you have, being inside of this mid lane bush gives you a lot of reaction time. You can see somebody from here, entering towards this bush from really far away. The latest you would see somebody is if they exit this bush straight at you here, or exit around this wall at you straight here. But if you're standing back here, you have time to walk away from this, no problem. So then we get into, like I said, really creative invades. I think some of the best invades we've even seen in competitive really take advantage, even if you're standing in really good spots, by sending people over these walls level 1, especially this thinner wall here level 1, and you can just sneak into the enemy jungle mostly undetected. But let's say that that somebody's likely to be standing in here in top lane. Really good invade would be to cut over this wall and then you could either go way around and just completely outflank this person, or you could just go over the wall, and at the same time as you're coming in here, you also have somebody who came over the wall coming in here, and now you're pinching them from two different directions. Their best case would be, to run backwards here, but if they're standing in the front of the bush, or if they don't have a dash to go around this wall and they have to walk around, they could be in trouble, especially if you're careful about how you approach this bush from over here. Same thing with this position. Let's say somebody's in here or standing in this area somewhere. If you cut the wall and you're invading them from around here and from here at the same time, very difficult to survive a really well-planned invade like that. And then of course you could just, cut over here as a jungler, especially if you're maybe more confident that somebody's not here, or you drop a ward or something, and you're going to be able to potentially sneak into the enemy jungle unchecked and unnoticed. So think about that. That's, it's really tough to defend something like that, to be honest with you. I don't know that I quite have a great answer for how a team would go about defending that. So, that's the basics of how people would 5-point. And then, like I said, I've already really given my opinion on invading, because I think that invading is a bit of a coin flip, even if you've got really good invading champions level 1. Like I said, I'm a master GM Braum one trick, and I never want to invade. I think it's bad. I'd especially rather play for cheesing my lane, which I think gives me consistent value, like almost every game, or like, just a ton of high frequency of my games, as opposed to looking for an invade that can often, even with good champions and good setup, can just go really far south. And we'll look at examples of this, but a lot of times the problem with invading is, let's say you understand this at a high level, right? And you want to take a really smart path to invade. So for example, you want to come here and you want to cut around here, or you want to invade top and you want to cut this wall here, or you want to invade bot and you want to come hug this wall here. It's the mirror opposite of top, and cut this wall into tri-brush. Problem that I found playing Braum is that even in like low masters, high diamond, when I ping this invade and I ping the exact way that I'm going to walk, I'll even like ping not to walk through tri-brush, and a giant percentage of my games, people who accidentally click late to this spot out of base, it's really a pathing error. What happens is that they're getting auto-pathed. If they click over here where we want to invade, they're getting auto-pathed through here if they don't immediately click it out of fountain. And so what's happening a lot of times is my teammates are just kind of autopiloting coming through here, and they're going to show the people who are sitting in tri-brush, even if me and like 3 or 4 other people are sitting in the right spot, the person walking out of here straight at tri-brush is going to show this person, and this person's going to back off before we get anything done. So this invade, this is why it requires so much coordination to invade properly. It basically just doesn't work, an unfortunately high percentage of the time, just because your teammates go the wrong way and reveal it. Same thing can happen with any of these invades, right? You'll want to invade here, and a lot of times people will path, straight out at them through here and give it away before they would have ever seen you. And they don't even realize they're doing it because they see you the whole time and don't really think about, enemy vision level 1. So they're just not aware of it. So, and that's only going to get worse the lower rank that you go. So if I'm having problems doing that and getting consistent advantages out of it on a champion that's good at it, level 1, and I understand, how to attack these positions, imagine what it's going to be like if you're in gold or you're in plat and you're playing a champion that's okay level 1 and you understand these things, but your teammates probably don't, and you're probably, even with pings, not going to be able to coordinate them all that well. It's better to just play for your lane, play for more consistent opportunities, not throw away the game level 1. Okay, so then, we'll go through these examples. Collapsing is another really important one I want to talk about, though. A lot of what happens level 1 is, let's say you have a situation like this, where we've now spotted the Azir here top lane as Cassante. And so you'll see a lot of situations. It's not necessarily the greatest play. I think this position is unfortunate because you have a very big wall in the way here. So this isn't the best position to collapse on somebody, given where your people are probably standing. But you'll definitely see situations where, you spot somebody standing in mid. This is one of the other dangers of standing in mid. Or you spot somebody top, or you spot somebody bot lane. And one of the most basic things that you can look for level 1 is, okay, we know where somebody is. Let's just all try to collapse on that person in a way that doesn't reveal where we are. So if we know that this Azir is standing in Pixel Bush, maybe Diana and Yasuo walk through the river here and try to attack the Pixel Brush. And if they get spotted out, somebody throws an ability at them or shows, then they just walk away. Even if they get spotted out, if the person lets them go through it, the Azir is going to know to back off and he's going to leave, but you know, they're just going to see once this guy starts leaving that they should go back to their positions as well. So another really basic thing is just kind of trying to collapse on somebody when you see them. Again, another problem with this and another reason why it's not so successful is people aren't very good at playing around the vision. So, you know, if we know that Azir is in the Pixel Bush and has vision like this, you know, we've got to be able to adapt to that. How do we attack a position like this now? You know, he's got pretty good vision all around him, but maybe the points where we'd be able to get him the most would be here, hugging this wall. Why? Because he'll see us from pretty far away, but we're also technically behind him. So if we take a diagonal line here, you know, and he's going here, we're probably going to catch him. But this is assuming nobody's watching this. Probably somebody's watching something. In this game, actually, nobody was. So I think that you could have seen a situation very easily, especially if Yasuo was already here. Instead of back here, where Diana and Yasuo just walk up river for free, and they try to attack this guy. Now, actually, Azir doesn't end up taking the Pixel Bush. He just ends up playing in lane. And actually, you do see them somewhat moving towards it. You actually even see, because it's Graves, and Tarzan is very familiar with Graves, very interesting here. Well, maybe we got an answer to one of our questions. You actually see Tarzan checking that the Graves is not invading him over this wall here with E. So that's one way. If you have an ability that provides vision, that's a really smart way to check for this, is knowing about the time that he would go over here. That is why Tarzan chose to sit in this bush back here, or sit in this bush back here instead of playing here. He already has Yasuo playing here, right? And if he sits back here, he's not revealing himself to Graves if Graves comes over. But, you know, most of the places Graves is coming over this wall, Tarzan would spot it out here. And then he, you know, throws his Q right at the end in case Graves is coming in late. So they're very aware of these things. So Tarzan drops his ward. And one of the things we want to talk about is warding at level 1 and whether or not we think it's a good idea. He's again warding for this late invade. He's very worried about what happens if Graves comes over the wall here, what happens if Graves and a bunch of people, you know, Graves and even just Graves in his mid, what if they're waiting to late invade him here at Raptors? Very concerned about this situation, so he's dropping his ward for it. You know, maybe the other thing too was that he just, you know, doesn't have a good use for his ward at this point. And so he's just throwing it down in the most helpful position that he can. And actually, if you look at it too, Astro, who was like late to the game here, actually does walk like maybe he was considering doing a late invade or doing this. I wonder if this guy is actually just ghosting Tarzan this game, by the way. Because one of the reasons he might have been late here off of the fountain is because he's opening up his stream. And then it is actually pretty sus that he looked like he wanted to go for a late invade spots that it's warded and then decides not to go for it. But maybe he decided because he didn't have time. Maybe we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Tarzan's probably getting ghosted again, actually. You know, so you have these situations. And so we'll take a look at another game. Okay, so we have another Astro Boy game, and this game's going to be one of the more interesting ones because they're actually going to do something level 1. They're actually going to go for an invade, which, like I said, is actually pretty, I wouldn't say rare. I mean, I looked at 8 games, and I saw a 5-point or, you know, something that was similar to a 5-point in almost every single game. So we're going to pay close attention to how everybody starts out again. So what we have is, like I said, one of the mid laners is moving into the one of the brushes here instead of trying to watch the middle of the lane, because again, if you're trying to watch the middle of the lane, maybe the lane's just a little bit too wide at this point to see everything perfectly, and you'd have to be able to maintain control over this middle area and avoid getting picked and all this stuff at the same time. So I see a lot of mid laners opting to walk into this bush because they can guarantee, protection from one side, that nobody's walking in and cheesing us from this one side, and then just not play for the other side. And we see that Nidalee's also already pinging the enemy red buff, or that she at least wants to come into the jungle here. And so this is another good position for the Neferi to set up in, because if we're going to invade bot side, he can't really be sitting in his top bush. He'll be too far away, potentially get spotted as he's moving down. And we can see that the Ashe, like I talked about a lot with Tribrush here, rather than trying to hold the actual Tribrush, he's taken Pixel Brush, so that he has a little bit more time to react to some of these things that are happening here. Teemo, similar to the Cassante from last game, is just playing for top lane, in top lane, not trying to get any information or guard anything. He just wants to be safe and make sure that his lane is secure. And we can see that Nidalee is, even though he intends to go here, he's not running straight there, because he's not necessarily trying to run into anybody or anything like that. He's first and foremost getting information to make sure that they're not getting invaded on this side, and then only moving when he has to where he wants to go. We'll get into this. This is another thing similar to this concept, where I think even if you want to cheese bot lane, we're going to look at some clips like this, very common bot lane cheese up in these bushes. You can guard for the first, up until minions spawn, really. You can potentially guard the entrances to your jungle to prevent yourself from being invaded, and then move into position here. The only downside to this is that if the enemy bot lane does actually commit a ward or something like that, they're going to see you when you move in late into this position. But that's okay, because if they were going to walk into this bush and ward, unless you and your AD carry were cheesing them when they went to ward, if your AD carry wasn't with you or was guarding an entrance anyways or something like that, or they ward in a careful way where they ward shallow instead of trying to ward deep when they walk into this bush, you might not catch them anyways. So that's very similar. So he kind of spots this out. And we can see from the other team here that they're looking to potentially invade Raptors as well. And the enemy top laner is playing for this since he's near it. And the Yasuo is just sitting under his turret, which I don't think is great. I think if they were looking to invade here, it's obviously not a good reason why the Yasuo didn't try to slip into this bush, make sure that nobody was there. You could have had a really bad situation happening here, because Yasuo is sitting under the turret, where actually like red team slips into this bush and they're trying to invade here, and not only they spotted, but now they're getting cut off here from red team out of this bush, because they didn't have control and vision of this bush, because Yasuo is AFK under his turret, and things like that. We see the bot lane together. I just realized it's a Kled ADC, but we're getting bot lane guarding this bush together here. I don't really think that that's great. I mean, they certainly have better chances of surviving if they get invaded on, I guess, since there's two of them. But, you're overlapping vision in the same way that you would with a turret. And it's actually the fact that Rakan isn't sitting back here, or Kled isn't sitting back here or in this bush, is why they're able to just walk in here for free this game. And this is something that's really important to keep in mind. We talked about in the 5-point how, maybe the AD carry would sit, where does the AD carry sit and where does the support sit? And I think there's two principles that are really important to keep in mind. In terms of what I think is optimal, most of the time, I think it's optimal for the support to be the one who sits near mid lane, because if there is a collapse situation or a fight that breaks out on the other side of the map, the support has more CC, is usually more powerful level 1, and is able to move and potentially wait, or like spend more time, commit more time into the play than an AD carry would. So I think it's optimal or ideal for the support to be the one sitting closest to mid lane and closest to where all the action could unfold. However, and this is really important, and we see it coming up in this situation, if both of you want to sit in the same spot, whether it's optimal or not, you should probably move to the other spot. So from the Rakan's perspective, this game, because of allowing this to happen, I probably should have been here if I'm the Rakan, because if something happens mid, or if this invade turns into a fight, I'm going to have more CC and be able to do more than the Kled level 1, and I'm going to be able to, provide vision of this area. Whereas if I'm the Kled, I'm thinking, well, even though Rakan should be over here, I'll just go over here and watch it because somebody needs to watch it. And so even though it's less optimal for Kled to be there, it's better for somebody to be there than for nobody to be there. And that's a classic kind of line of thinking or logic that comes up in solo queue. Is a lot of times there's the optimal way to play the game, but it's solo queue. And so even at the highest level of play in solo queue and challenger, again, I say that like outside of the LCS or something like that, you need to be making plays that aren't maybe the most optimal play your team could have made, but the best play that you can do in the situation. So instead they're able to just walk in here completely for free. And again, I don't think that they necessarily would have committed to a fight here unless it was really free, unless someone was, standing here not paying attention or something like that. I think if they ran to a defense of 2 or 3 people here, they probably would have turned around and left and started their own camps. I think it's only because this ended up being really, really free that they ended up actually going for this. So as a result, Nidalee, and we can see this, is able to take actually all of these camps. And I know we're supposed to be getting into, we're really just supposed to be going over the immediate level 1. But look at the impact that this play has, that allowing them to walk in here for free has. Because they've lost a lot of HP, playing into a very difficult double range matchup here in the, they're playing double melee into Senna Ashe, like 2 of the most heavy poke champions to play against, right? So they're having a very, very hard time level 1. And because they've given this invade away to this Nidalee by not watching this area and not warding it, now what do you end up with? You end up with a situation where you're actually going to get dove bot lane. And this is something that, again, I started to realize, okay, probably watching the Challenger replay is not super helpful to most people because you won't see this below Masters. Even in Masters, you probably don't see this as much as you should. But they're going to actually dive here level 2. And this is something that, again, I think you just very rarely would you see enemy jungler managing to invade entire bot side of the enemy jungler without getting spotted straight into a level 2 dive bot lane. And it does turn into a little bit of a fiesta here, but you have to keep in mind that enemy team ended up committing their mid laner's teleport, so they're losing a lot of XP and gold in mid, while this is going on. So, we can leave it at that. There are some more shenanigans that happen in this game, but again, we're not trying to go over. When you talk about openings in League, there's definitely the way that you're going to open your lane and play the first 3 waves and the first couple of levels. But really, we're focusing on the level 1 in terms of the jungle positioning. Okay, so I just want to show the consequences of leveling level 1 really, really quickly. So obviously, we're coming off of the fountain here, and we're playing Nidalee. I guess I shouldn't have necessarily started W level 1. But, I mean, we're going to get a general estimate of what's going to happen if we're a laner and we decide to commit our Trinket, or we're a jungler. So let's say that we just, run out of base, level 1, kind of straight at the enemy blue buff or enemy raptors is going to take roughly the same amount of time, and we place our ward. So if we're getting our ward down sometime between maybe 36 and 40 seconds, we can see that our ward is going to go on at level 1, and your Trinket's cooldown is going to depend on what level you are. We got, it's at 197 seconds after 42. So if we just add these together, let me do some quick math here real quick. 180 would be 3 minutes. 17 plus 42 is about 1 minute. It's like 1 second off of 1 minute. So we don't get our ward back up until 4 minutes. And so this is really important to note. So then what happens if we switch out for sweeper nowadays? So you can see it just retains the same exact cooldown that our Trinket would have had. So this has a couple of implications. Number one, the time at which you should ward, if you're in like bot lane or in top lane, the time at which you should be warding, for the potential jungle gank that's coming is usually right after you hit level 2. So we can let the minions play out and kind of get an idea of what time that is, but I'm pretty sure it's well before 4 minutes. So the problem is that if you ward level 1 even pretty much right away, your Trinket is going to go on cooldown and not come up until 4 minutes, which is probably after when you need it. So, we can see here that we're on wave 2, and we're just going to let this play out so we can get a sense of the timing. So if you're in a solo lane, this first melee minion dying here on wave 2 would mean that you hit level 2. So you'd probably ward, sometime after this. For bot lane, it's these first 3 melee minions dying, and then you also have a little bit of time to skirmish afterwards. So you're probably going to ward this bush at the earliest in bot lane or top lane at around 2:30 to 3 minutes. Probably really, if you want to give a tighter time window, really you're going around like 2:30 to 2:40. And so the problem is that if you use your Trinket, especially if you use your Trinket later level 1, you're going to be in a bit of trouble because you're not actually going to have your Trinket come up for the most important timing when you'd want to use your Trinket in bot lane or in top lane. And it is true that in bot lane you have 2 Trinkets, so in theory one of you could ward level 1 and then one of you could ward this bush. Problem with that is then usually you would want to potentially be able to ward one of these bushes, especially if you get into a fight bot lane, and you won't be able to do that with your other ward. And then if you're the one placing your ward level 1, you're relying on your AD carry, even if you ping it out, to be the one to go ward that, and that's not necessarily going to happen. Most junglers are going to finish their clear at about 3 minutes. I'll get, not a jungler, by the way, but somewhere between 3 minutes and 4 minutes. You get really specific depending on what jungler you're playing and what sides of the map. But the very fastest junglers are still finishing their clear a little bit after 3 minutes. 4 minutes would be slow. To be clear, most junglers, especially the higher up you go, who are doing it correctly, are going to be finishing around, maybe 3:10 to 3:30. So the problem is that if you're the jungler, since we didn't get our sweeper up until the same time those laners would have gotten their Trinket up if they used it level 1, if we ward level 1, we're not actually going to have this sweeper until 4 minutes. So the reason why it might be nice to have sweeper here on jungle is so that, let's say we've full clear towards top, and then we want to sweep this out to make sure that we're not wasting time, and then we see, okay, this is warded, that's why they're not walking stupidly, I'm just going to reset after full clear and then go back to base. Alternatively, you see, okay, it's not warded, and now you get a little bit more patient here, and then you look for the gank in the lane. Same thing if you finished your full clear towards bot lane and then we're looking to gank there. You're going to be able to finish your clear by clearing out that ward, or by seeing that it's not warded and still fishing for that gank, knowing that you're not wasting your time there in that situation. So the problem is that if your sweeper's not coming up until 4 minutes, you're not actually going to be able to do that, because if you're waiting until 4 minutes, unless you're finishing your clear at like 340, 350, you're probably not going to be able to do that right when you go to gank, because your sweeper won't be up yet. One thing that I like to do to game this timing a little bit, because it is quite close, is I really like to, on jungle, ward with my Trinket ward on whatever side I'm not starting on. So let's say I'm starting bot side, I'll put my Trinket ward here, like maybe here or here, so that I'm seeing both of these and making sure that my other side isn't getting invaded. Talk about in solo queue, it's really important to kind of cover for your teammates' mistakes. So even though that side should be guarded, like we talked about previously, that's going to protect you as a jungler, even if your teammates aren't watching at all. And I think that they tend to not watch top side more than they tend to not watch bot side. So by getting my ward down there, it's a much shorter path out of my base gate to ward here and then immediately recall, and that might save me, an extra 10 or 20 seconds compared to walking and warding raptors, or compared to walking and warding a buff or something like that. And that 10 or 20 seconds is going to actually allow me to get my oracles up by the time I finish my clear, so that when I'm coming into top lane around 3:30, I actually do have my sweeper to clear this out. So that's one way that you could use your ward as jungler, but then have your sweeper up a little bit early, is just a defensive ward. The other thing that we could talk about with that is, in mid lane, I think especially with these bushes pushed really far back, and with junglers usually full clearing level 1 most of the time nowadays, I would not worry too much about warding these bushes in mid lane. And so I think it can be much, much, much more impactful for your mid laner to always be the one to consistently try to ward this. It doesn't cost you a lot as a mid laner. It's going to give you good information anyways about if you're about to get ganked, because this is really the only camp that's super close to you. And so you're going to see when they're there, and you're going to have that extra information on when their jungler starts, in the middle of their clear, and when they finish, which is going to help your team avoid ganks, and you avoid ganks even as a mid laner by knowing where they are, and help your jungler get an advantage as well. So I think probably mid laner could look to use their trinket here. We already talked about how a lot of mid laners slip into this bush anyways, so if they slip into this bush and then place a ward here, I think that can be really good. You don't really want to give away that you've warded somewhere, so I wouldn't necessarily like to walk up here and ward, even though that could be a little bit more of a direct path. But top lane and bot lane probably should not ward level 1. They should probably save that to protect themselves from the gank. And junglers should probably not ward level 1 unless it's very defensively, very early on, to switch out for sweeper, or if they feel like they really need a defensive ward. Another really important thing to keep in mind, although it is, it comes with its costs and benefits, is even for those other lanes like top and bot lane support, we talk about covering for your teammates' mistakes. Let's say you had this situation in the last clip where there was a Kled and a Rakan, and they were both sitting in this bush here. Let's say that you're the Rakan and you don't want to watch this here for some reason. You feel like you need to be here, or you have somebody standing AFK in fountain, which is much more likely to happen the lower down you go. One thing that you could do for sure, or you could do this as a jungler as opposed to a defensive ward like this, is you could ward one of the entrances to your jungle as the jungler, maybe as the support or the AD carry. And so let's say that you have nobody watching one of your entrances. You may consider whether or not being able to use your ward to ward for that gank is worth plopping a ward down here just to make sure nobody's coming through this entrance. So even as an AD carry, even if your support's literally AFK in the fountain level 1, one person can single-handedly, with their ward and their body, guard both of these entrances at the same time. And if you get to choose one, right, you probably want to put the ward here because this is more invadable, harder to defend position, and then you'll sit back here. Or if you're like on this side of the map, maybe you ward here because you're worried about this, and then you'll sit back here somewhere. So, something like that. So you can use your ward to make up for somebody level 1 just being AFK or not watching something, but just consider the consequences, knowing what you're going to get out of that in your lane and what you're going to get out of that if you're a jungler. So here we've got a game that showcases some warding level 1. And we're going to take a look at how this goes. We're still on these challenger games with Astro Boy, the rank 3 jungler in NA. We can see that he spots out, any sort of shenanigans that are coming out this way, and stands very safely back here. But we can see that the Shaco has slipped into the other mid lane bush and is now walking this way. Another thing that I see a lot of people doing level 1 that I think is really worth mentioning is, rather than guarding back here at all, like back here, is you can guard by moving up into this bush. And you can at least check that you can do it for free. Because level 1, if you run straight at this spot here, what you're going to be able to do as a support is not only are you going to be closer to the action than if you were standing back here, but you have just as a defensible position, because you can see, if somebody's coming, You have the tower guarding this way, so they can't come through this entrance. You're going to be able to see all of this. So you have plenty of time to react to anyone coming this way through mid at you. And you have plenty of time to react here because you're going to see somebody as soon as they run around here or as soon as they exit this bush. And so if you're standing back here in this bush, you have a huge radius here, you know, before anyone can get close to you. And so you can accomplish the same thing of guarding this entrance, but by standing up here instead. And so that's a really good spot to stand, and that's what we see the Shaco doing a level 1 here. It also means, for example, that since we know that you can guard this entrance with this mid bush, your mid laner could stand in one side and your support could stand in the other side, and you'd have really good control over mid lane and over these entrances. Problem is that if everyone catches on to this and is always doing this, you're probably going to run into each other level 1. And obviously your intention, especially if they're bringing multiple people, is not to hold this position. So then if you have to fall back because they're bringing multiple people into this mid bush, you're either going to end up in a fight level 1 you don't want to end up in, or you're going to have to just retreat back into the same spot anyways. But if you can take it for free, you might as well take it for free and hold a better position until they force you into this further back position. We can see that the Shaco here is actually going to go for a ward level 1, which, as we talked about, means that he's not going to be able to ward, you know, right away at maybe 230 or so when he would if Jarvan was full clearing towards bot. But, you know, he has some advantages. He is Shaco. Maybe he'll drop a box or something instead. Maybe his AD carry will ward it. And he's going to get that extra information, and it's going to be a really good ward because actually they're going to see where Jarvan's starting because of it, which can be really helpful. We can see, let's see who dropped it. Jarvan actually dropped this defensive ward here, but didn't immediately recall and switch out for sweeper. So he has this defensive ward, but he's deemed it for some reason better to stay on the map than to get his sweeper. And so he actually just doesn't have that at all as an advantage. I just want to see really quickly, we can fast forward, what are the consequences of being able to see Jarvan here? You know, does it actually change anything? Is Zyra able to invade or anything like that after her blue? Or does she opt to just full clear towards bot? She's opting to just full clear towards bot. And we can see another great example of warding level, well, actually it wasn't quite level 1, but Kennen was able to move up and put his ward down on the Raptors to spot out Zyra here as a result of having prio in mid lane. So we see that ward as well being demonstrated in this game. But it looks like not a whole lot changes. The only thing that could change at this point is that the Gangplank knows that he needs to be more careful when Jarvan's finished with his full clear up top. But probably this doesn't change a whole lot anyways, and especially in this game because the Gangplank's already being pushed backwards. And of course the Gangplank could, looks like he warded as well, but Gangplank could have looked to ward. Actually looks like he's just dead, unfortunately, even though they knew Jarvan was coming. Yeah, so he just dies anyways. Where did he put his ward? I mean, I know we're getting into like a little bit later in the laning phase. Oh, he put his ward in here. So this is actually really interesting. Solar Baka here on the Gangplank actually gets cheese level 1 by the Shen in this bush. And a lot of that is because he was just AFK under his turret level 1 and not, again, being proactive about preventing someone from entering this bush. Or standing here. We'll get into this in some of the clips, especially where we showcase the bot lane cheese, but I think it's good to see it top lane as well. Is, you know, I talked about being able to consistently get something else other than leashing, other than trying to look for an invade. What kind of advantage can we get in top lane and in bot lane level 1? And especially if you know your champions are stronger, what we're going to refer to as really cheesing, especially out of this bush, is a really great way to consistently get an advantage. And so we can see here, for example, that, you know, Solar Baka face checks straight into the Shen and takes a really bad trade. And ultimately, losing his ward here as well as, like, losing this trade is what starts, it's not everything, but it's what starts putting him into this situation where he can get dove in the first place. So really important that if you're playing top lane, you're standing, you know, here so that you're you're not potentially allowing somebody to come in here. And that's where it gets really tricky, because your job as a top laner is really hard. In theory, you also want to prevent their team from invading here and taking your camps without knowing it. But you also want to make sure that you're preventing someone from entering this furthest up bush in top lane, and you can't do both at the same time, really. The best that you could do is to drop a ward or something like that in your lane and guard this, or drop a ward here and then play for your lane. But again, that means you're not going to have your ward for the all-important, very crucial, like 3-minute, 30-second full clear gank that you are going to expect in a lot of games. The other nice thing, I've talked about this before, about warding here at like 230, like right after you hit level 2 and have a little bit of time to skirmish, you'll hit level 2 a little bit faster in the top lane, so you maybe ward it just a tad earlier or something, or maybe it means that the timing for you is, instead of right after you hit level 2 and have time to skirmish, it's like you hit level 2 and have time to push a wave. And but the really nice thing about this ward at around 230 or so, or whatever the timing was, is that you're going to be able to spot out not only the enemy jungler's full clear gank, but also if they take a relatively early gank. Like if they full clear one side and then walk straight at top, it's a minute early before a lot of junglers finish their clear. So even if they go for a relatively early gank, now not if they do their buff straight to top lane, but if they do 3 camps into top lane or 3 camps into bot lane, your ward will, you'll be placing it right before they come for that in a way that won't get you caught out. But it'll last long enough, the word will last a minute and last long enough to spot out their full clear gank as well. Or I think it lasts 90 seconds, actually. You can see that really quickly. Yeah, 90 seconds. So, since it lasts for a minute and a half, if you place it at 230, it's going to last until 4 minutes, which is plenty of time for their full clear gank, but also early enough that you'll catch some early ganks with it as well. Actually, I guess he just lost his potions as a result. But anyways, so you get the idea with that one. So this is the last challenger game that we're going to take a look at here. And it's actually quite interesting. It's one of the 5-point like starts. They're a little bit late off of the fountain here. Light Rocket's also a little bit late off of the fountain. So that's not great. But I really liked how both teams did their 5-point this game for the most part. So we can see very standard, like Jax is sitting in this bush, but instead of sitting here or, sitting in a position that makes him really vulnerable, you can see he has a nice cone of vision here. So the worst possible situation would be they sneak in through this little pocket of vision into Pixel Bush. But that's hard to do. You really have to know, you'd really have to know this pocket of vision really well in order to be able to accomplish that at all. Most people, especially if you're bringing 5, somebody's walking around here on accident and avoiding this tiny pocket. But so the worst case scenario here is somebody comes right here, but most of the time you have a pretty good pocket of vision. And then we can see Dokla also as well guarding this jungle entrance on the top side. Let's see. So Light Rocket is a little bit late to the party, but I assume, he probably would have sat in here and he goes there anyways, had he, been here a bit earlier. And then we see Victor taking a very nice position. He's guarding this entrance here, but we can see how he's standing very far back, like we talked about, not standing here where he's going to get caught by people coming around this wall, not standing here or here where he's going to get caught by people coming around this wall. You just want to stand in a way where you have the biggest cone of vision, give yourself the most time to react to the worst spot they could possibly be coming from. So when we're looking at the fact, that if we're Victor here, where would be the worst spot somebody's coming from? It's like, if we're standing here or here, the worst spot is boom here, boom here. If we're right here, we're probably dead if they have good CC level 1 and can hit their abilities. Same thing here. We see a really nice spot that the Swain is taking. He's a little bit vulnerable here, but he's standing really far back in the bush and is going to be able to retreat from this spot quite nicely, towards this turret or back here. One thing you have to keep in mind is your exit path, though. This is really important. And bot lane can be a little bit tricky. One of the reasons why it can be really difficult is because we can see that in this situation, if he has to walk back, he can't actually walk in a straight line back, and he can't walk in a straight line away from the enemy either. And so you run into a really difficult decision here with a spot like this where you either have to kind of snake around in an S shape, so you can't run in a perfect diagonal, but you can, once you get around this little corner, you can mostly run in a diagonal away from the enemy team, but it's not perfect. And if you run here, you're actually running towards the enemy in terms of this direction, but away from them in terms of this direction. So having to run like this way a little bit is pretty bad because you're going to have to avoid this wall. So, you know, you can get caught here because even if you have a little bit of time to react, if there's 5 people here and they have good CC, you're going to have a hard time if you get, you know, RE charmed or flash RE charmed or something like that, getting away from something like this. It can be very difficult because you're going to have to run around this wall. So you should keep in mind your exit plan. But this is a difficult bush to defend, and I think that standing in the back of the bush is pretty decent. But again, sometimes it's not always the best. While standing in the back of the bush certainly puts him in a safer position, if we look at the exact mirror, which is the Jax, look at how much better vision the Jax has compared to the Swain here. This Swain has a tiny pocket of vision out into the river. If they're coming from here, or they're coming from here, or they're coming from here, he has very little time to react, especially here. That's why this is hugging this wall is so important, because his vision, you know, that he doesn't have here, you're not going to get revealed until here. Whereas if you're coming here, you get revealed here. Getting revealed here is much better. So that's why you should hug this wall. But I think that actually, if you just look at this objectively, I think the Jax has way better vision of the river and what's going to happen. And if Swain was actually standing a little bit more forward here, he has actually, so let's see, he'd be standing like here, because that gives him a little bit more vision out here. Basically, if he's standing forward, or even as we talked about out into the river, you can sometimes have better vision in a way that protects you even more. So we've talked about this even with mid lane too. Sometimes it's better to be further out, but to have good vision all the way around you level 1, rather than being further back, but very limited vision. Same problem with this bush. Like if you put yourself in a pocket back in this bush, and you can only see when they, when they're like here, your pocket of vision is like this, you have such a small pocket of vision and distance between, okay, I can see them when they get here and I'm here, versus I can see them when they're, well, we have someone, versus I can see them, when they're here and I'm all the way back here. Big difference. And then Senna, which is totally fine, is not guarding any entrance, but is, kind of playing for lane here. And making sure that the enemy bot lane isn't cheesing them level 1 and potentially moving into position herself. And then on the red side, we had Zazel and support slipping into this mid bush here. We had a mid laner kind of, being able to spot out most of what's happening mid, but he's a little bit far back. I don't know if he moved. And then Astro was again guarding this top side until he moved to where he actually wanted to start. So again, we see that guarding one place, but then moving. And then Prussia on the RE, this is like a RE one trick, is unfortunately actually just kind of AFK under his turret. So I'm not a big fan of his level 1. I will say though, this is a bit of a weird tip, but if you are going to go AFK level 1, which you should not, but if you end up finding yourself like, going to the bathroom or getting some water or doing something, or you're alt tabbed or anything like that, even though it's not good and you should never be doing that, and you should obviously be taking a more proactive level 1 where you're getting information for your team, way better, and your teammates will agree, way better if you're just AFK or if you're alt tabbed, to sit under your tower so that you don't die, even though you're not providing information to your team, that you don't die. Better to do that than to walk into a position to guard it, and then you're not actually guarding it, and then you're alt tabbed or you're AFK and you get killed. And that's how a lot of kills get picked up level 1, of course, is going to be from people being almost AFK level 1, especially at lower ranks, and they're alt tabbed and they react really late or really slowly to somebody attacking them level 1. Why are you out in a position, defaulting out into an aggressive position to get extra information when you're not actually there to do anything with the information? I mean, it's terrible. Like, if you think about it, right, you're like, okay, if you think about the logic, let's say this Ari's alt tabbed or AFK. I'm going to sit here on autopilot when I come into the game, even though I'm going to be alt tabbed, because I want to, well, why? Why not sit here? Well, because I get more information here. Sure, but if you're getting information because you see people here, that means, and you're alt-tabbed, you definitely don't want to be seeing people if you're alt-tabbed, because if you're getting that information, anytime you're actually gaining that information, if you're alt-tabbed or whatever, you're going to die most of the time. So not good to do that. Better to sit under tower if you're going to be AFK. Okay, so this is actually one of my games from this patch, and I just wrote down here in my notes that there's warding and then fighting level 1 bot. So obviously I've determined that a lot of times I don't think, like a lot of these top laners, it's worth it necessarily to play to guard your jungle, or you can guard jungle for a little bit and then move into a better position. So for example, compare my position now to the position the Swain was in. I have a lot more vision here, but I don't have any more vision here. So I'm really vulnerable if they invade here, but I do have better vision because the spot that I'm standing in a lot of spots.
30 seconds until minions spawn.
You know, you can see actually here, this is a really good example because I move. You can see when I move here what my vision expands to and looks like. Let's go. Oh, I missed it again. We'll have to go back.
Welcome to Summoner's Rift.
So you can see here that I'm expanding my vision by being further up, but actually my weakest point is just as weak, which is really bad because your level 1, you're only as strong as your weakest point that you could get attacked at. And, you know, I'm really vulnerable here. So now take a look at what my vision looks like if I'm in this side. It's a lot better because now I can see a lot more this way. And so I'm going to be able to see really easily, you know, I'm going to be able to see really easily if they're coming from here compared to the other spot. So a really interesting situation is I guard and now I'm moving in for my cheese, but they've warded this, which like I talked about is really smart because it means I'm not going to be able to cheese them level 1 without them knowing that I'm doing it. So when I move up here, we have a lot of basic situations happening, like a combination of concepts that we talked about. And we can see on our top side, junglers guarding one entrance, top laners kind of guarding the other entrance, although granted further up here. The reason why this is guarding this entrance is, again, they'd have to do some really shenanigans dash over here, know exactly what vision path to walk, be very difficult to pull off an invade through here, although technically it's possible, but it would require going over a wall. And a lot of these 5 points are vulnerable to people going over walls. But basically, you know, if somebody walks up and through here, you know, Viego's already spotting that out. And so Jace being here spots out like this entrance and this entrance are covered. So there's really no way in except over the wall. So, you know, you've got a decent, you know, coverage here. And then Jinx is taking a really defensive position here. I don't really think that this is that great because he's kind of vulnerable. I mean, they can even attack from like here, for example. So he's in actually a position that's not entirely all that safe, especially since I've moved away from here at this point, and they could be coming through here or coming through here. And he's not really getting vision on a whole lot. He only has vision if they're coming maybe through part of this here, but he's opening the other half of this invade up. So he's only half guarding this ramp. He's only guarding this ramp if they come straight through here, but not if they come through here. And so he's not accomplishing a whole lot by doing that, especially because I'm looking to cheese and he needs to be with me bot. But actually they've spotted me out, which brings us to, you know, another concept we talked about, which is collapsing on someone. So they have vision on me, but rather than showing me that they know that they have vision on me, they're going to wait. Actually, Syndra's griefing a little bit. Okay, she's waiting. And, you know, so they're playing this vision game here with me, and she knows, you know, I can stand over here without them seeing me. And so now she reveals. I think this was a mistake. They should have collapsed on me by both walking together around here or something like that, so that they had, you know, complete flank on me. I guess maybe they're worried about Jinx because they do lose level 1. So the worst, but they know they have so much information. They know Jinx isn't in this bush with me. They know she's not in this bush. So worst case scenario for them, Jinx is back here or back here and is, you know, or maybe back here, but is able to get up and help me by the time they're doing something. But I think that they definitely could have taken a more aggressive flank angle on me here when they collapsed. Of course, if their jungler or their teammates were with them as well, then their jungler could have joined them in the collapse. So I'm getting flushed out of this position here, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to take like a really, really bad trade here, but I just have to walk out and survive. But now Jinx is close. It's actually looking like they were going to back off, but because I'm continuing to run straight away and not give them any indication of a turn, even though I know we're turning this now because Jinx is pinging it, I have Q, I've been holding it the whole time until Jinx gets here. Boom, now I know we're turning it. And so, you know, I wait until they're about to see Jinx anyways as Jinx rounds the corner, and then we get onto them. I don't even hit the Q onto Syndra, I hit it on the Nami, but Braum is so strong level 1 that we're just able to turn this into a kill. So really nice there. So this is a great example of multiple concepts of like warding level 1 to defend your lane from the cheese, but then maybe over chasing too far and not collapsing properly on the information that they had. And they could have taken a really nice trade and then walked away, even though they didn't collapse properly, but they over chased and then they got turned on because their champions just aren't as strong as ours level 1. So even if I'm missing a bunch of HP, if they get Braum passive on them level 1 against a Braum Jinx, they're just going to die in this matchup. And so that's really important to keep in mind, is that just because you have the advantage through information, oftentimes a champion that's very strong level 1 is still going to be able to beat you and just outright beat you. Okay, so this clip is actually mostly about a really good way for you to ruin, and this happens so many times, a really good way for you to ruin a good cheese in bot lane. It's obviously something you don't have to worry about too much in top lane. We can see again similar stuff, right? We're guarding entrances here, and our mid laner's playing to one of the bushes. Same thing here, you know, on the other side. They're kind of stacked up to defend each other in case Yasuo gets attacked, especially because Yasuo is standing probably a little bit too far up in this entrance. And Galio's taken some extra space here and has, you know, a huge circle around him of space in case they start trying to move into this entrance. And he's also, well, he's not really guarding his bushes top lane, but he's as close to top lane while watching this as he can be. Now for me, I'm continuing to guard, you know, entrance. Ezreal's doing the same. But then I'm going to move away as soon as, you know, I need to in order to get into position to potentially cheese their bot lane. And even though their bot lane's down here, they didn't ward and they didn't take control over this bush. Instead, they just double stacked on this bush, which isn't good. We saw this in the first clip with the Kled and the Rakan. So they left this completely open, although we didn't know that. And they also left this completely open. So we get into a really, really good position against their bot lane. Because they're just in prime position to get cheesed, and Braum is extremely strong level 1, and Smolder's also a pretty weak champion level 1, and so that's really important to keep in mind. I guess I should briefly talk about why Braum is such a strong champion level 1, and maybe a Smolder, or a champion like Smolder isn't so good level 1. Really, when we're thinking about what makes a champion really strong level 1, we're looking for a champion that effectively has maybe 2 abilities level 1, or really short cooldowns on a really impactful ability level 1. So let's go through some champions as an example. I think Braum is the prime example of a champion that really has 2 true abilities at level 1. The reason for this is because Braum's passive is a stun that does a bunch of damage, and his Q is a slow that does a bunch of damage. And so even though it's just a passive, his passive is essentially an extra ability. So Braum is really like a champion minus the stats that has 2 abilities level 1. If we take a champion like Leona, for example, Leona doesn't have a passive that really counts as a full ability. It's a little bit of extra damage, but it's nothing crazy. It's not like Braum passive where it's like a full ability. But her Q is on like a 4 or 5 second cooldown. And so if you can get into a fight level 1 on Leona where you're able to Q multiple times in a chase down, like if you're able to Q twice, that's really, really good, because in the same time most champions would use 1 ability, or Braum would use 1 ability, in the same time Braum would use his Q, Leona's probably going to be able to Q twice. We can see Braum has a 7.4 second cooldown on his Q, so Leona with more of like a 4 or 5 second cooldown is probably getting to Q about twice as much as Braum if you're in a chase down scenario. And she's also got, when we think about runes, Aftershock, really important, right? Aftershock is almost like an ability. It's going to make you a lot tankier and do a decent chunk of damage. Guardian, maybe not as strong, but pretty decent as well. So you can see why champions like Braum and Leona are very strong level 1, either because of very low cooldown on a CC or important ability, or because of us effectively having 2 abilities at level 1. Let's think about champions that really have like 1 weak ability or half an ability or like no abilities level 1. Prime examples of this are champions like Smolder or Aphelios. Aphelios doesn't have any abilities level 1. He has access to changing back and forth on his auto attacks between 2 guns. That's his like quote unquote ability level 1. But it would be too broken if he had an ability level 1, because he'd effectively have 2 abilities, or 3, where basically you'd be able to use that ability in one way with one gun and then use it again another way with a different gun. And the combinations would just make him too strong level 1 with compared to how strong the champion is in general. So the champion Aphelios was designed to be weak level 1 because he's so strong in other aspects and other areas of the game that he'd be really broken if he was also one of the best champions level 1. So they felt like not giving him an ability point other than being able to switch between his guns level 1 was fair. So for that reason, Aphelios is very, very weak level 1. Smolder does have 1 proper ability, level 1, but it's not really going to do a whole lot. So maybe he'll take like a, like W, what do we got here? Like, he'll take his little Q, or he'll take his W, where he rolls the ball at you and does some damage. It's fine. They do a little bit of damage. They help him stack a little bit, but they're nothing special and they don't do very much damage level 1. So we can see, his W is on a very long cooldown level 1. It's 14 seconds, does a decent chunk of damage and slows, but it's on a very long cooldown. He'd only be able to use it one time level 1, pretty weak. And then if he takes Q, which is probably more standard anyways, cooldown, not terribly long, but not going to do very much damage. Probably less than an auto attack. So these abilities are not very impactful, and so these champions just feel very weak. Also, of course, Smolder, similar to Aphelios, but Smolder even more so in this area, is designed to be weak throughout most of the early game. And so, of course, his level 1 is also going to be weak. So when you have champions like this that have 1 very basic, slightly damaging ability compared to a champion like Leona, who can maybe stun you 2 or 3 times level 1 in an extended fight, or a champion like Braum, who's going to be able to slow you, who's going to be able and do a decent chunk of damage and be able to like stun you after the slow and do a decent chunk of damage. That is, those champions are really strong level 1 for those reasons. So what we see here, and I hate that this happens, it happens a lot, and it'll happen the more, probably the lower you go, is we're in a great position to cheese. But for some reason, Ezreal decides to throw away all of the time and effort that we've committed to getting into this spot to cheese over 1 Q, right? Like, we spent time not watching our jungle camps and not doing anything else in order to get into this position, and they are completely unaware of it. They're not showing any signs that they know that we're in here, and we're just immediately throwing Q and backing off. So we traded this whole position for like, I don't know, what do we do here? Like maybe 90 damage or something like that. If that. And at this point, right, like they're going to be aware of the fact that I'm likely to be in here, and Ezreal's walking straight back really far away from me. So I don't want to put myself in a 1v2 position by staying in this bush and still trying to make the cheese work. So I'm just forced to walk back here off of this position. And so this is something that you should be really aware of as an AD carry, I think, is if your support is setting up a really good cheese in this bush, especially a really strong level 1 champion like Braum versus a really weak level 1 champion like Smolder, this could have potentially, this is a cheese that very easily and often results in me killing this guy level 1 or blowing his flash, and Ezreal just threw it away for absolutely no reason. So if you're an AD carry, don't do that, please. Okay, we'll move on to the next clip. So I found this play really interesting, so we'll go through it. But this is another guy that I know who plays Braum, and he has taken this really interesting kind of weird path where him and his AD carry have kind of managed to path into enemy jungle I did not see that. So actually, they should know that there's a percentage chance that people are in here because they put this word down. So that's not great. But you can tell he already has it in mind, or at least the... oh, actually, never mind. That's the Blitzcrank on the other team pinging the Nyla. But basically, they're going to take this same cheese, but rather than doing it in here, they're going to move it up to here. And, you know, you might be wondering some questions like, it used to be that everyone cheesed this tri-brush. Why do people not cheese this tri-brush? Well, it's really easy to avoid getting cheese there. Even if you're in lower elo and you leash, you just walk around back this way, and it takes you like half a second, 1 second longer, maybe even the same amount of time as to walk through here. So this cheese just didn't work most of the time. Also, if you got in a long extended fight and actually tried like flashing after them to kill them, their jungler, if they were starting this buff like a lot of the time, which they would because you're cheesing it because you're waiting for them after they leash, you know, their jungler would come in here and back up their bot lane and then end up killing you. But this is a really interesting invade by basically taking this cheese here and moving it here, so that no matter where they're coming from, you know, you're going to spot somebody here, you're going to spot somebody here, and you're going to get onto them. And so they just get onto them level 1 and get the kill. So I thought this was just a really interesting cheese. It's a little bit weird, right? Like, so this is actually an Iron 4 game. So it's a little bit weird that this worked, considering placing this ward here isn't great because this ward doesn't really do a whole lot for you. You can actually even see, for example, that it doesn't... Well, I guess if... Yeah, I mean, you would see if their jungler's starting here most of the time, because if they're pulling the camp out at all, like unless they do something really cheeky, you would actually see them enter the pit. You know, so unless they just did it in place because they knew this ward is here, but that's never happening. So this is an okay ward. It's just unfortunate then, I guess, that the timing happened like this. Nyla being AFK level 1 and not realizing that there was potential for people to be here like the Blitzcrank did is probably what did her in. You know, but very interesting. And then, of course, the other difficulty with doing this consistently is that probably someone is watching here. And so if you're able to get something like this off, you're already at an advantage. The nice thing about this is that this is, you know, much less frequently watched for or guarded, because again, it forces you, if you're trying to invade through here or trying to cheese through here or here, they're already watching this. Whereas by going here, you're forcing them to pick between, do I watch jungle or do I guard my lane? Like top laners are forced to do. You know, am I going to get cheesed? Is this person going to get some sort of advantage in the lane, prevent me from walking in? All these things, you know, so keep that in mind. Okay, one more thing that's also really important, since we're moving into the, you know, non-high elo games, is that we noticed, hopefully, that there was no leashing at all in any of the Master Plus games. So in any of the Challenger games and in the 2 games that we looked at from me, no one ever leashes. So keep this in mind if you're a jungler in low elo, that asking your team to leash is always a bad decision. Like 100% always a bad decision. If you expect your team to leash you as a jungler, you're actually just trolling and like not understanding that part of the game. So it really delays your laners being able to get into lane, really delays them being able to get level 2, and it only reveals where you're starting to the enemy team if they're competent enough to pay attention to it. And it doesn't even speed you up that much. Now, why does it not speed you up that much? Because most of the time, especially if your laners are smart and trying to get up into lane on time, they're only going to provide you a very small amount of damage in the form of a few auto attacks onto your camp, which isn't really going to speed up your clear a whole lot in a meaningful way anyways, and is definitely not beneficial to get a few auto attacks faster on your clear compared to revealing where you started, delaying your bot lane, being able to control their lane and get level 2, preventing them from being able to cheese, and on top of all of this, if we look at, let's see, if we look at and just kind of think about what's going on, junglers, good junglers, like to use their smite on their first camp. Why is this? The reason for this is because if you think about how you're going to use smite in the way that's going to speed your clear up the fastest, For a lot of champions, the way that they're going to speed up their clear the fastest for sure is by smiting and hit level 2 as soon as possible. Because the more time that you spend clearing while you're level 2 or level 3, the faster your clear is going to be. So why would you not smite your first camp and spend more time clearing at level 1? Because if you get level 2 and you get access to that second ability, you're going to be clearing a lot faster. So as a jungler, you're trying to hit level 2 as soon as possible if you're really caring about optimizing your clear. That means that you need to smite your buff. So here's the issue that poses essentially. If your bot lane leashes you a little bit too much, it's actually a waste of your smite, even though it might give you your ability a little bit faster. It's a waste of your smite because you're not going to need to do the full damage with your smite. If you actually get a good leash, or even a pretty standard leash, the buff gets low enough that it's not really worth it to smite it anymore. So you're in this catch-22 where, like, I want to smite it and hit level 2 first for efficiency, but I also want to be able to use the full damage amount on my smite, so I'm not getting either, really. I'm not getting either. I'm saving my smite for my second camp, and that's not always that good. So you take that into account, that you're like, it's a small thing, but these details matter. There is a negative drawback on top of all those other things, them not being able to cheese and push and contest level 2 as quickly, and revealing where you're starting, and all this stuff for just a few autos faster on your clear. You're also going to be a little bit slower on your clear because you're not using smite on your first camp to hit level 2 right away. Now, if they underleash you and you do end up needing to use smite, now your position is revealed, you use smite, and you just are stuck with all the other negative disadvantages that we already talked about. So let's take a look at this clip and see what's going on in this one. So we can see that they're going for this invade here, but like we've talked about before, you actually really want to invade from hugging this wall here if you're going to invade Tribrush, because that's where you're going to have the biggest vision cutoff if someone's standing in this bush. And so we can see Jinx here is actually laid into the bush and doesn't necessarily see them right as soon as she would. But again, they're revealing right here, whereas they could be here, unseen. And so they just take this really bad path. And this is a perfect example about how even against an iron player who's laid into the bush, if you invade, straight at the enemy through here, they're going to spot it out. And there's a bunch of shenanigans. Mordekaiser actually ends up walking in here, even though they just knew a bunch of people were in here. So that doesn't really make any sense. And against a Braum level 1. So they actually, get punished for this because it's iron. But the main point of this clip is to understand that when you walk straight at the Tribrush here and don't think about vision at all in terms of what path you're taking to invade, your invade's much less likely to be good and successful. So, again, you should be attacking this position by hugging the wall and using vision. So here we're going to be taking a look at a clip from an Emerald 3 player. This guy, we're going to be taking a look at a couple of clips from his recent games. I think that Emerald's really nice to take a look at because it's a little bit higher than average for sure. But the games are going to make a little bit more sense. We're not going to see random shenanigans happening level 1, so things are going to make sense, but we're going to be able to see some of the, some of the good and some of the bad. And it's going to be a little bit of a more average rank. So we can see here, for example, already off the bat, we've got, the Xerath here warding this middle bush to prevent them from getting cheesed in bot lane. And, we have a couple of people slow off the fountain. Caitlyn's not guarding anything. Jin's not guarding anything. Amumu's in this position. We saw the Jinx in an earlier clip in where they could invade through here and we're not guarding anything. He's probably just sitting here because it's close to his Raptors that he wants to start, but he's not really watching this entrance at all. And now we can see Jin actually wants to move up and cheese the enemy bot lane. And so he's going to call Xerath back in here. And they're going to start to move up. So there's really two different things that happen here, level 1. One, this Bel'Veth is going to go for a late invade, which we haven't talked a whole lot about late invades and junglers making use of their champions being better level 1, because we've been waiting for this example. And then we have another great example of the bot cheese. So let's just watch one at a time since they're happening simultaneously. So let's see what happens with the bot cheese. both top laners just AFK under their turret. So we can already see, for example, both mid laners were AFK under their turret. So we can already see a very, you know, lack of urgency. Nobody's trying to hit the wave as soon as they can in mid lane. A lot of people AFK under turret or laid off of the fountain, you know, these sorts of things. So let's watch the bot cheese real quick, and then we'll focus on the Amumu play. So for some reason, Jhin just walks out of the bush and shows that they're doing the cheese. So that's not good. They obviously know now that they're in there, and yet Caitlyn walks straight into them anyways, despite the fact that she should have seen that they were there. Now, maybe everybody's watching this play over here. That's probably what happened. That may even be why Jhin clicked. He might have clicked towards this play and walked out of the bush, but this is very amateur. Okay, and then Sona's just kind of AFK watching. Xerath unfortunately misses the stun, or this would have been a really nice chunk onto Caitlyn. And, you know, Sona starts W to make up for some of this, you know, this trading that occurs, which I think is fine. But yeah, Caitlyn takes a pretty big chunk, even though this was a really messy invade where they did not use, or messy cheese where the Xerath missed its stun and they didn't really play it all that well. So then let's rewind and take a look at this, you know, Raptors contest. So similar to how we talked about like level 1, you know, we know that Amumu is pretty weak level 1 and very vulnerable to getting invaded. Prime example of a jungler that's like that. And Bel'Veth, like Graves and Nidalee and some other really strong early game champions, has a lot of early game skirmishing power to potentially do something like this. And so she's just trying to, you know, kind of bully him off of the Raptors. This is really dangerous though, right? Because their mid laner is obviously closer and has first move. You're really relying on your team and your mid laner here, especially when you didn't ping this out, your intention to do this. You're really relying on your mid laner here to make this play. Really, it actually is quite a 50-50 flip that comes down to Bel'Veth happening to smite away the Raptor. And so because she got the big Raptor, she hit level 2, and Amumu is still stuck at level 1. And so that's really going to make all the difference here in this fight. I think it's a little bit weird that she took her defensive stance here, level 2. I think she should have taken her knock up. But anyways, so, you know, little things like that. But as you can see, Amumu's really far behind off of this level 1 invade from the Bel'Veth, and Bel'Veth is continuing to just contest him in the jungle here, because there's nothing Amumu can do, and his laners really can't continue to move for this, or they're going to lose a lot. And so Bel'Veth is making very good use of her level 1 advantage that she has, you know, over the Amumu, even though it was a bit of a flip. And Amumu's just completely bullied off of his camps. Again, I think if she took the knock up, Amumu probably would have died. And I don't know why Bel'Veth, I guess she's ganking bot here. I don't know why she's not like taking the camps here. I guess ganking bot here could be okay. She still doesn't have knock up too. Yeah, she can't even move into this, so like, so much better if after forcing Amumu out, she just starts doing his you know, his Krugs and his red. So again, you can see obviously in Emerald there's some errors in the way that they're thinking about things and the way that they're playing it out. But I would say overall this was quite a good invade conceptually from the Bel'Veth to this late invade. Although it was a little bit of a flip. So I mean, if you're, I don't want to say it's good actually, because it was a very much a flip. And if she had been level 1 and Amumu had hit level 2, Ryze and Amumu probably just kill her here 100%. So this was a very coin flippy way to play the invade. But certainly in the matchup, you could see, like I talked about, a Graves, a Nidalee, a Bel'Veth, champions like this taking advantage of a champion like Amumu level 1. Maybe it's not the best example actually, because this was 50-50 and I wouldn't call it such a good invade, but you know, late invading, certainly an option. If you feel like their laners are locked in to lane, or they would lose too much to move, and you feel like you're much stronger level 1 than their jungler, then you can force 1v1s in the jungle all the time in the same way that you can in lanes in order to get some sort of cheese off as well. So again, we're taking a look at a clip from this this altitude guy in the top lane in Emerald 3, but you know, we can see here in this clip, very basic, but they're going to spot out some information on where somebody is, and there's just going to be a failed collapse. So we can see here that, you know, maybe altitude is a little bit late. The Gragas is a little bit late getting into this bush, since Mordekaiser was able to get here first. So Gragas was probably a little bit late off the fountain and takes a bad trade here, level 1. And you can see that the enemy support and enemy jungler, even though they're not necessarily in a normal position, right, you know, they're going to opt to try to collapse on this Gragas here, level 1, even though it ends up not working out. So if we go back, you know, they're in their normal positions, and then they're going to give up their normal positions in order to try to collapse on Gragas as soon as we see him. So, okay, boom, we see the Gragas, we're on our way, you know. And Bard is taking a really nice path here, kind of hugging this wall like we talked about to not give away that he's there. And he just never shows, which is great. Bard, you might see supports. I think it's really good if you do get some damage off, even if the collapse doesn't come through. Can be really good for the support to kind of check. This is a little bit difficult because it's top lane, but you'll see in mid lane a lot of the times, I think support can stop this recall. A lot of times when somebody gets chunk level 1, you know, in bot lane or in mid lane, problem with top lane is that it's so far away, you know, and you're opening yourself up to a lot of vulnerabilities here, especially knowing that, you know, you don't know where enemy jungler is. They have 3 people bot, so if you show that you're all up here, you know, that's not ideal because then they might invade you or something. But yeah, definitely can look to stop this recall. And if you stop this guy's recall and either he comes to lane late and misses XP, or he just decides to stay with not very much HP, that's very, very helpful to your laner. But too far away from bot lane and opens yourself up to too many invade possibilities on the bot side, not knowing where enemy jungler is this game. But you see that very commonly, that the support will fish for, you know, especially on Braum or on a Bard where you're going to queue that person from distance. You'll definitely see somebody fishing to stop recalls here in mid lane, you know, or here in bot lane, since they're close to where they need to be defending and where they are going to lane anyways. And so be very careful about that too if you're on the receiving end of that. If you do end up taking a bunch of damage level 1, which of course this whole thing is trying to prevent, but if you do get chunk level 1, you know, take a safe recall back behind your turret. Do not recall in front of your turret where they can hit you and stop you and force you into a really bad start to your lane. It's going to ruin your whole practice for the game because you're not going into a clean lane like we talked about with invading and that sort of thing. And it's going to, you know, just mess up your chances of winning in general as well. Okay, so one final clip here from Emerald 3 and in general, and then we'll just wrap up with my thoughts on, you know, where different roles should stand and how to approach level 1. We'll just do a quick summary after kind of studying these examples and stuff like that and going through what we've talked about how we should really be approaching level 1. So in this example, we're actually taking a look at a bot lane that is just significantly weaker level 1 compared to another bot lane, and what it looks like when you get a successful cheese off, but you're not as strong. So, you know, in this case, we have like a Senna Tahm Kench, which is a super powerful duo bot lane, and we have a Caitlyn Zyra, which is also pretty strong, not terrible or anything like that. Zyra is not a champion that's particularly strong at level 1, though. I would say for sure. So keep that in mind. And so what we just see in this clip is that we see again this bot lane cheese in this bush here, where we have the Zyra and the Caitlyn getting into the bush. But of course, like we talked about, I think that they're weaker in general than Senna Tahm Kench, since Zyra is not that strong level 1. Tahm Kench has got a lot of tankiness. They're going to hit the E. They're going to hit the Q. So they've hit both of their abilities. And as you know, for hitting both of their abilities, they've only done maybe, you know, 100 damage here or so, maybe 120 or 130 damage to the Senna. Meanwhile, Tahm Kench is now, you know, getting onto them here. Senna is able to heal that back and do some damage with her Q. And Tahm Kench being quite the strong champion level 1, you know, very similar to Braum, he's going to be able to Q for damage and slow and also be able to get the stun. It's a little bit easier, I would say, for Braum to get the stun than it is for Tahm Kench, because he'll need his Q to come up a second time if he wants to get a slow into a stun like a Braum would. But obviously in this scenario, Tom is able to do that. And so Tom is basically just as strong as a Leona or a Braum would be level 1, like we talked about in a chase down scenario like this, where he's able to get a lot of damage, a slow into a stun level 1. And so even though Zyra hits both roots and Caitlyn, hit her Q, she'll probably hit a Q here again in a couple of seconds. Wow, it's a really long cooldown. Oh, maybe she used it again already. You can see how bad this trade ends up being for the Zyra and the Caitlyn. So they end up, after all is said and done, too, they end up losing like 2 pots, and then, Tom Kench uses 1 pot, and then of course Senna's going to be able to sustain and heal a lot of this back, which is very problematic for them. And Tom Kench is going to be able to heal a lot too. So we can see that just in general, I think even though they had the advantage here in this bush, especially because the Senna was avoiding the cheese and standing really far back, it's really important. Like, one way that you can enter lane and avoid this cheese is just like hug this wall. You're so far away that even if they do tag you with something, you're just too far away. So the best response I've seen, and I try this cheese almost every game on Braum, the best responses I've always seen are AD carries and supports who don't necessarily even commit their ward to this. They do their guarding and stuff like that, and they don't want to waste their ward, but they recognize that we could be in there, and so they hug this wall and then start playing the lane kind of horizontally from us, and they start playing the lane here. And now we're in this situation where it's like, okay, they're hitting the minion wave from up here, and we're not very close to them, so we're not going to get a successful cheese off. But the longer we wait, the longer we're sitting in this bush not doing anything to push the minion wave, and they're getting to push for level 2 for free, and we're not able to do anything to them. That's the best response that I've seen to this sort of thing, is to recognize that they could be in here. I'm going to hug this wall and farm from here. Same thing in top lane. Somebody could be in here, just walk over here and start farming from here until you see your lane opponent. If they're in here, they're probably not going to be able to do a whole lot from you if you're really far away from them. It'd be the same as if they're approaching from here and you're back here, and you're going to be able to actually get a push advantage if you want that. Now, the nice thing on Braum is that most of the time, even if they are getting a push advantage and we're not getting our cheese off, it's like, okay, they played it smart, they avoided the cheese, but we were going to get pushed in anyways, and now we can get pushed in safely without losing a bunch of our HP fighting for a level 2 we were never going to get in the matchup. So that's really important as well. So that really concludes the clips that we wanted to run through here. So let's just briefly wrap up by talking about, all of these concepts and kind of put it together. So number one, I think invading is bad because it often results in just really coin flipped results, where despite having good champions or bad champions level 1, despite taking a good or a bad path, oftentimes when you're trying to coordinate 5 people, somebody's going to be AFK on the fountain, somebody's not going to want to come to the invade. And even if a bunch of people do come to the invade, one person can ruin the whole invade by coming from the wrong side or the wrong spot and not hugging the wall in the way that you want to. So it can be really hard to coordinate a good invade properly in solo queue anyways. And even if you try your best to coordinate a good invade, most of the time you're just coin flipping because people stand all over the place is the reality of the situation, especially the lower rank you go. And so it's not always consistent to attack a spot because you open yourself up to a lot of vulnerabilities by invading. When you invade as 5 people together, you're not guarding any of your lanes, you're not guarding any of your jungle, and oftentimes, depending on where people are standing, they can just be standing in random positions that happen to counter your invade, and all of a sudden you get caught and killed while you're trying to invade, even with stronger champions. Happens all the time. And so in my mind, if I'm like automatically losing, let's say 5 or 10% of my invades, if I'm going for an invade every game on Braum, I don't really like those odds, because even if I'm winning 5 or 10% of my games guaranteed because we get really far ahead level 1, the problem that I have with that is I know that consistently I'm going to be able to get ahead of my lane by playing well. So why would I take these chances of completely ending up throwing the game away when I have better odds in lane? It's all about odds and playing your best expected value. So even if I feel like maybe because Braum is a strong invader level 1, maybe I feel like I auto win 10% of the time and I auto lose 5% of the time. So that's going to increase my win rate if I was a 50-50 player, right? But if I'm not a 50-50 player, and I'm consistently winning my lane at like 60% odds, I have a lot better odds of winning through my lane rather than taking a 5% increase on my chances of winning the game through these coin flip invades. So I don't really think that invading is all that good of an idea. The higher up you go, the better people are going to be at reacting to it. The lower down you go, the worse your teammates are going to be at doing it. It's just way too hard to coordinate in solo queue and quite frustrating. So as a result, you're going to do some sort of 5-point start. But as we've talked about, I think where people stand in a 5-point has really, really evolved from where we first started. And so rather than just saying, oh, plop this person into this entrance, I think we say you're vulnerable to an invade onto yourself from like this angle and this angle. So you probably want to try to take pixel brush so that you have a big circle of vision around you. If you can't take pixel brush because the enemy top laner is contesting it and is stronger than you level 1 and can walk you off of this bush, then you need to be, you know, maybe just playing for your lane top lane, since that's a viable alternative and this isn't really a popular invade path anyways to get into the jungle. You know, so you could just play for your lane, or you could play in a really safe position, let's say like in the back of the bush or at an angle where you reveal a bigger cone like that Jax did, like down on this side of the bush, you know. So if you're standing like here, that's probably good. Standing here is probably bad. You know, for the opposite side, you're either going to stand here, but again, your most vulnerable points to an invade are going to be from around these rocks. So you're either going to stand out into the river here, or you're going to stand back here so that maybe, well, even this, you have this wall in your way. So we talked about, you know, if you get invaded from here, you can probably only stand here if you know you have a teammate standing here. Another place you can stand is you can contest this pixel bush like we talked about from this side, and you'll be watching here, because if you've got a teammate watching here and you're in the pixel brush, then, you know, you're covering here and they're covering here, so no one can get into your jungle here. So even though you're not necessarily seeing the entrance to this jungle here, if you're here and somebody else is posted up here, you're covering this entrance. So this is another option. Again, if you're stronger than them level 1, especially in top lane, but if you're weaker than them level 1, then you know you're probably not going to be able to hold this if you both run in here and try to contest this. So you're probably going to want to take one of those safer options, like again, either playing back here or playing up here, or, you know, playing for your lane. For mid lane, it looks like mid lane's gotten way, way, way too wide. So you're probably not going to be able to spot out, you know, every entrance to these bushes. The bushes are too long compared to where they used to be. They're too wide compared to where they used to be. And so, you know, you need to see here if people are cutting in, you know, here along this wall. You need to see if people are cutting into this bush along this wall to know that people are in the bush or not. And you need to be able to see here and here. This is just too far away from this for one player, even standing in the perfect middle, to be able to see all of them. And again, if you're weaker than, you know, their mid laner level 1, even though you have a good circle of vision around you, so you're not vulnerable to an invade, their mid laner could easily force you, or any champion they send up mid could easily force you off of this spot anyways. And so rather than doing that, maybe committing to actually just walking into one of these bushes, level 1, is good. And preferably the side that you're protecting your jungler the most on. And again, be clear of your path to leave. You know, for junglers, probably sitting back here, you know, to guard this spot. But keeping in mind that people can come over these walls, unfortunately, level 1. But that's just too, you know, there's just not a whole lot of counter to that, to be 100% honest with you. But we saw, you know, obviously Tarzan had a really good defense of this, where he was sitting in this back spot here so that, I mean, they could come over like this and he wouldn't see it. But most of the time, they're going to come over a spot where he would spot it out here. And then he used Diana Q, an ability with vision, to spot out that as you're leaving this, nobody's coming. So, you know, that's a good way to approach this. So maybe here, back here only if you're worried about that specific scenario like he was in that game, but most of the time you want to be back here. The problem with being back here is that your exit path is very limited. You could actually get hit from both sides here on an invade, a really smart invade that's not just attacking you from one spot, but attacking you from multiple spots at the same time, like over the wall with one person and 4 people coming here, cutting off your path to retreat. Very, very potent invade. That's like getting into really next level competitive, you know, level invades. that people can come up with that are very coordinated. And again, here can be, you're if you're standing like in this bush or over here, your weakest point is getting cut off from here. But if you're standing out in the river here and you can see that people aren't coming out of this bush or somewhere, back in here, you're probably in a good spot. Mid lane, we've kind of talked about. And then down here, same thing. Like you could enter here, they could enter here. Again, who can push each other off of the bush? We don't know. Person that gets pushed back probably guards here, or guards here. But the person that gets to keep the bush gets to keep it. I don't see these bushes contested as much as you would think that they would be theoretically, with kind of the best spots for people to stand in. And then we get into down here. This tri-brush is actually not very vulnerable. It's very different, right? We've actually got 4 tri-brushes in the corners here, but it's the same thing as this. Like nobody stands here because this isn't guarding a jungle entrance, and so this tri-brush is completely irrelevant. So there's 3 that are relevant because of where they are, because they're actually located in entrances. So the map isn't perfectly mirrored in that way. But this one is a very defendable one because, especially if you've got somebody up here, nobody can even be coming at you through here. And so if you're sitting here, you even have vision out and around this pixel bush. So, your worst possible invade spot is like here. You're going to spot this out pretty early. So you're pretty much fine if you're sitting in here in this tri-brush. Again, you can push for control of pixel bush, just like in top lane, especially if you're stronger level 1, and then have a bit of a bigger safety of circle of vision. This bush is really hard to guard, but there is an entrance here, so you're either going to have to take pixel bush, but again, if you're not as strong, you can't do that. And so then you're either, like we talked about, maybe here, but then you're still vulnerable from here, here, but you're still vulnerable from here, or you just play for lane. And then, of course, I think it's really useful in both bot lane and top lane to look for these cheeses in these forward bushes, especially if you're stronger level 1. But keep in mind that just because you can cheese, especially if you're weaker level 1, doesn't always mean that it's good. So you can cheese if you're playing one of those weaker champions, like if you're with an Aphelios or you're with a Smolder level 1, and you're trying to do that cheese against a Braum or a Tahm Kench or a Leona level 1, you're going to actually probably lose and maybe even die for doing that, like we saw in the clip where the Syndra and Nami tried to go on me level 1, or like and then we turned it on them with the Jinx, or in the clip that we saw of this game where the Zyra and the Caitlyn tried to cheese the Tahm Kench Senna and ended up getting punished really hard for that. So that's what I think about 5-point versus invading. Obviously, if you see an opportunity to collapse on somebody because you actually spot out somebody, so for example, if we talk about all these clashes that make sense, like over this pixel bush, maybe 2 people entering from one team and the other team into this bush, or one team, entering into this bush and the other team entering into this bush, or 2 people contesting the middle of mid lane. If you see clashes like that, it's totally fine to walk off of your position a little bit and try to collapse on the person. But most of the time, if they're standing in a good spot anyways, they're going to have time to react to that. So that's why you're not vulnerable even if you slip into this bush, is because the bush is so long that when you see somebody coming into the bush, you have totally time to decide to fight or bail, and there's no reason why you should be picked for doing something like that. Even for this, like we talked about, unless their whole team happens to be right here, you're very unlikely to get picked for doing this, because most of their team in standard positions is just too far up the river that if you're getting beat off of this position and off of this bush, then you're just going to be able to retreat, like we saw where that Bard was attacking this spot, trying to come up through here against the Gragas in that one game, and he just wasn't able to do anything against him. As for warding, as we said, depends on when you put your trinket down. If you put it down defensively in your jungle right away, your trinket is going to be up, probably at like 340, which is a little bit late, but it's a little bit late. And so it basically means for laners that you're probably not going to be able to ward at an adequate time for a jungler who's finishing their full clear, and especially not for a jungler who's 3 camping into your lane. And so it's not very ideal for a laner to use their ward level 1, except for mid lane, because mid lane's very safe now because of these bushes being pushed back to the side. And so you have so much open space to react to getting ganked that I think it can be very, very good for mid laners to put their ward on Raptor, either level 1 or a little bit, after, if they think they're going to be able to get the push in their lane, but that's not always guaranteed. So mid laners warding level 1 on Raptors is, of course, really, really good and a really standard thing. It helps you just as much as a ward in your lane, because you're going to see when they're near mid lane by warding here or by warding here. And you're not really going to need that full clear ward timing anyways, because nobody full clears into mid. It's just not really, you don't finish on that side of the map. You don't finish at that area. So it's a very weird gank. And you have so much time to react with the way that your lane is. You have a short lane to get back to turret, whereas these are further away from your turret. So these lanes, bot lane and top lane, are actually having to run further back from the middle of the lane to get to their turret. So you have both a short lane and you have a wider lane where it's going to be harder to get killed from the sides. So very difficult actually to die to these ganks mid, like level 3, level, or after full clear. So, mid laner can definitely use their trinket level 1. Jungler can use their trinket level 1, but like we said, if you use your trinket level 1, and swap for sweeper, your sweeper is going to be up at the same time. So it's either going to be up at 4 minutes, or if you drop an aggressive ward, it's not going to be up for 4 minutes or later. If you drop a safe defensive ward, maybe you save yourself 20 seconds, maybe your sweeper will be up at 340. That's not terrible. So I think junglers using a defensive ward, recalling, getting sweeper, and then having sweeper a little bit after they finish their full clear at like 340, potentially that could be fine to make sure they're not wasting time on their first gank after a full clear. But it is a little bit delayed, and so you may consider just deciding to either start sweeper and just stick with the sweeper for that reason, but you don't get the ward level 1, or you go trinket and you accept that you're either going to use it level 1 for scouting information, but you get no sweeper when you finish your clear, or you decide to save your ward and then you use it whenever you need it, or maybe as you're recalling to provide vision to your laner or something like that at a weird time, and then obviously on your first back, then you can switch to sweeper, and have that available to you. But I think probably the best option for jungler would be to defensive ward the side that you're not starting, or one of these 5-point starts, or bushes or areas that you want to have vision of that your teammates are not guarding for you, and then back and buy sweeper so that your sweeper is still up for that situation. As for supports, AD carries, and top laners, I wouldn't waste your ward when you want that to protect yourself against the gank timing. You're going to ward a little bit, I'm basing it on the bot lane timer, so top lane's a little bit different. But for, AD carry and support, you're going to want to ward a little bit after you hit level 2, sometime around 2:30. For top lane, similar timer, but you're going to hit level 2 earlier because you hit level 2 off the first melee minion of the second wave, rather than hitting level 2 off the first 3 minions dying, the first 3 melee minions off of the second wave. So top laner is going to hit level 2 a little bit earlier. So it's not just going to be level 2 and then a little bit of time to skirmish and then ward. It's going to be, as a top laner, you'll have a little bit of extra time to maybe finish the wave and then skirmish, or maybe take a longer skirmish and then you can ward, but the timing would be around the same. In theory, the AD carry or the support, one of them could ward level 1, but the problem is you're in this situation where you don't want to rely on the other person to ward. So if you're the AD carry player, you want to have your ward to be able to put this ward down to protect your lane against the ganks, like we talked about, at 2:30 or so, right after you hit level 2 and have some time to skirmish. You want to be the one to do that, even though if you're support, you should be the one to do that. If you're AD carry, you should be the one to do that. Either way, you take responsibility for it so that you're not dying to that full clear standard gank every single game. You're always protected against that. And again, placing the ward down at 2:30 means that even if they do a couple of camps, like a 3 camp into bot lane, it'll be early enough. You'll place it down early enough that you'll spot that out, but it'll also last for 90 seconds after that. So it'll last all the way until 4 minutes. So it'll last long enough that you can, see their full clear gank as well. So, that's my thoughts on the warding. Leashing, So here's my thoughts on leashing. So I said pretty clearly, as a jungler, you should never expect your teammates to leash, no matter what side of the map you're starting, no matter what camps you're starting. Never expect your laners to leash at no matter what elo you are. However, for laners, if your jungler expects you to leash, which below like platinum, even some junglers in emerald, believe it or not, still expect their laners to leash, even though it's just objectively bad, you run into a bit of a problem. Let's say I'm a support, and I experienced this when I was climbing on a Smurf account this split, and I want to do the things that I know are correct and that I know are best for my lane. Like I want to set up my cheese every game level 1 on Braum. But I'm playing in gold, platinum, maybe even in emerald, and my jungler expects me to leash. You're playing a risky game by not leashing them and forcing the play that you want to play. For one, especially the lower you go, your AD carry will either leash anyways, and then your cheese is worthless because your AD carry is not in position with you, or your jungler will get really tilted in a small percentage of games and literally start trolling from level 1 because you didn't want to leash them and they don't understand why. They're wrong and they're bad at the game, but again, you have to do the best that you can with the teammates playing the way that they're playing. And so if you're in a lower rank, like in gold or below, where your jungler expects you to leash every single game, probably just leash them the best that you can and get to your lane and try to win your lane consistently without the cheese. It sucks that you have to do that, but in order to protect your jungler from mentally booming and to play the way that your team expects you to play the game, you just have to find advantages elsewhere, unfortunately. So that's one of the problems with that. So I don't think that you should ever leash. I don't think that it's ever optimal, but I understand that if you're in a lower rank, in order to not really tilt your teammates, and I've very much experienced this season, you need to definitely leash if they really expect it and they start pinging it. Maybe you can look for something like a cheese, and then if they ping you about it, then you could go. But don't expect your teammates to be able to play the cheese properly. Expect them to not understand what to do. We saw that clip even in Masters where my Ezreal were in a great position to cheese, great matchup, and we're just throwing one Q at them out of the bush and then running away. And that happens when I try to cheese like that way too often, like 30-40% of the time. Very, very frustrating. So don't expect a player in gold to be able to cheese with you that well either, and don't expect a player who's a gold jungler to, be perfectly happy with you not leashing and going off and doing your own thing. So just try to do, play to what your team needs you to do in order to not mentally boom your team in the way that you feel like is the best. So you can't force anything to be your way. We talked about it very clearly with when it comes to, being able to cover multiple positions, potentially giving up your ward in order to be able to cover for somebody who's not watching something because they're AFK in Fountain or because they refuse to move to maybe a more optimal position. You just got to ward and cover for them. It's the same thing with leashing. You just got to do it if they really, really expect you to do it. Is it good? No. If you want to get to an elo where you can play more optimally, you got to get better at other aspects of the game so that you don't have to deal with that level 1. And I'm sorry that you have to deal with that level 1, but that is what it is. Fake leashing is another thing we didn't really talk about. I think that fake leashing is a little bit overrated because I think this cheese in bot lane is so much stronger, or let's say even in top lane. The cheese is so much stronger, especially depending on, if you made a good champion at cheesing like I do. The cheese is so much stronger that at any rank where anyone's actually paying any attention anyways, better to just cheese. And most ranks, like let's say Emerald or below, nobody's even really paying attention to whether people are leashing or not, or whether they're coming from this way or that way, or whether they got to the wave late. Half of the time in Emerald, people are just walking into their lane late anyways. So you couldn't even tell if they leashed or not. So fake leashing isn't going to give any advantage to you in a rank where you trying to give the enemy team false information when they're not even looking for the information is just not going to do anything. It's just going to delay you coming to lane for no reason. So I don't think fake leashing is very good. And then we've kind of already covered cheesing. So that about wraps it up. Hope that you guys learned a lot about level 1. Obviously in the next one we'll be covering moving into laning, and for junglers, like different clear options that you have. And so we'll be moving in, technically that's sort of also level 1, but we'll be moving into openings that apply to like your first couple of levels of the game. So with that being said, good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.